To quote the great Prodigy from Mobb Deep, there's a war going on outside no man is safe from, and that war is a class war. The billionaires, the elite, the oligarch love to clutch their pearls and freak out when you hear some working class consciousness, some class solidarity amongst the lower classes. They freak out and say, oh, they're waging a class war against us. They want to tax our money. They want to come after us. Oh my God. And it's disingenuous for a million reasons. But the biggest one is that they've been waging a class war on the lower classes for decades. I mean, frankly, if you want to contextualize it in a longer span of time of human history, there's consistently been an elite ruling class that has used their material and cultural resources to maintain their status as being above the rest of people, and who has been in that elite ruling class has shifted and changed throughout different eras of human history, different geographical locations. There's a changing relational element of who's the ruling class, who is the subordinate class. But what I'm talking about specifically right here is in the vein of global capitalism, especially Western capitalism, but not distinctly Western capitalism, just how much of a war on the working class, the middle class, that the billionaires, the elite, the ruling class have been waging over the last 50 years or so. After the end of World War II, Western nations famously, for the most part, developed these big welfare states with high rates of taxation on those at the top. These redistributive programs that gave the average person more access to public transport, healthcare, education, retirement savings in the form of pensions or social security. And these type of programs in the wake of the Second World War created a much more, not egalitarian society, but the gap between those at the top and those at the bottom, sure, it was still massive when you consider the scale, but in the grand scheme of human history, relationally, that gap was slimmer than it had been previously in the Gilded Age, or than it has become since the 70s/80s and the rise of neoliberalism and this kind of globalist capitalist movement, where you kind of now have this transnational elite, these transnational organizations who make unilateral decisions that affect people across different nations. Decision making is now not only made at the state level, but you have these corporate and international forces who they can make a decision that affects people all across the world. And in this era of the last 50 decades of globalization, the rise of neoliberalism, what we have seen is those at the top try to squeeze every single penny that they can from the lower classes. There was a study that came out a few years ago now, basically saying that if wages in relation to the middle and working class stayed the same as the income from the upper class from, I don't know when they started tracking it, but it was decades ago, maybe in the 70s or 80s until now. Basically what they found is that the people in the working and middle class would each have earned an extra $1,000 or more a month for that period of time. So basically what that is showing is that over time, the amount of money that people in the working and middle classes have been making in relation to those at the top has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller as they keep taking a bigger and bigger cut, while those of us at the bottom don't really get pay raises. If we do, they're not keeping up with inflation, and so we keep falling further and further behind in terms of our purchasing power, in terms of our economic status relationally, whereas these people at the top are getting wealthier and wealthier, more powerful and more powerful. Surely this is not the first time you've heard that. There are people like Bernie Sanders who have made it their entire life mission to preach this point over and over again. But I think it's important for us to remember and appreciate just how crazy the scale of this class war, of this robbery from the elites, from the lower classes is. And this article here really hammered it home for me when I saw this. It was one of those things where I'm not surprised, but it's so extreme that I'm still a little surprised, because I know that this type of trend is where things have been going for at least 50 years, but it's accelerated heavily in the past 10 since the first Trump administration. And that's exactly what this article backs up. But the scale of it is even more severe than even I realized. So what this article is telling us, and this is from a couple weeks ago, is that American billionaires reached a record-breaking 7.6 trillion of personal wealth as of Labor Day 2025, and that is up 4.7 trillion or 160% in the less than 8 years since the first Trump GOP tax law was enacted in December 2017. Do you understand how insane that statistic right there is? In just 8 years, they have more than doubled their net worth. And this is at a rate that is unprecedented. That's why I'm saying, although this has been happening for 50 years, 160% since the first Trump tax cut. And this is why people like me will continually call Donald Trump a grifter for acting like he's this champion of the working class, this populist fighter, when really all his policies are corporatist and benefit those at the top. In his first term, his most significant achievement was this Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, where it was basically a giveaway to the wealthiest individuals and corporations. And so far in his second term, legislatively, the biggest policy that he has passed has been the quote-unquote big beautiful bill, which also has another massive tax break and cuts trillions from working class programs, and the amount that he cut from programs that help the working class basically matches up exactly with the amount of tax giveaways that the top 0.00 whatever 1% are gonna get from that bill. So Trump basically literally took over $1 trillion from the working class, gave it to the upper class. It's a class war, and you better stay conscious that it's happening. And this is just something bigger that I feel like, people do talk about it, but not enough on the daily, is that those of us in the working class, we are just letting ourselves get fleeced. We have no tangible action or ideas except in very small circles that have unfortunately failed to organize at a mass level. And we, in my opinion, just get so distracted with, our everyday struggle, which is fair. Most of us, I'm sure if you're like me, you wake up, you go to work, you're just trying to pay the bills. It's hard to organize collectively or to fight back against this type of systemic pressure from those who have hundreds, thousands, probably millions more times power than we do. I understand that it's kind of a losing battle from the outset, but there's also the case that we have all these divisions, distractions. Admittedly, I fall prey to this. I waste countless hours a week kind of stuck on my technology, probably scrolling social media, doing things that just have me brain dead and distracted. I'm sure you do too. And even if we were able to transform that time into something more meaningful, more powerful, that would be a starter. The other thing is that all these kind of cultural divisions that, in my opinion, the elites have put onto us, I feel like they have us in a lot of these debates, and a lot of them are valid debates in the sense that they're general cultural and policy questions that a democratic, civilized society needs to figure out, what our policy on abortion is and other matters such as that, right? These are legit questions, but at the same time, and maybe this is reductionist of me to say, but I feel like to a certain extent, a lot of these cultural divisions, they're serious, and I have personally strong beliefs on many of them, but at the end of the day, I think they kind of fail to matter when we're getting fleeced and screwed like this. When you had that famous article a few years ago, which was saying something like, the future for the working class is you'll own nothing and you'll be happy. Kind of this idea that everything will be rented, leased, subscription. Like you're not actually going to own anything of your own unless you're in that top 1% or less, and everybody else will just be renting from them. Kind of like this new technocratic feudalism type of system that it's almost describing. And that's really where we're headed. We're headed into a future where, unlike our parents, many people in my generation, we have no hopes of ever owning a home, of ever owning property of our own. All we can really envision for ourselves is going to work every day, killing ourselves, working 40 or more hours a week just to make ends meet. Most of us going into debt at the same time, because even though we're busting our asses off, everything is just so expensive that we can't even make ends meet with what we have and have to, use credit cards, lines of credit, loans, every now and then we might have good weeks where we can pay some of it off, and then a few weeks later something happens where we need to take a little bit of money out and we're right back in the same situation. For the average person, what's the stat? Over 60% of people, 60 to 70% of people live paycheck to paycheck, meaning if they miss one paycheck, they're not going to be able to pay their bills that month without assistance from family members or a loan or something of that regard. I mean, things are dire. Things are getting worse. You look at the statistics regarding credit card debt being at a record high, missed credit card payments being at a record high. The whole economy is a giant bubble that feels like it could pop at any second, that is propped up by this artificial investment from large companies that make the overall stock market look good. But never in the last 50 years has the health of the stock market been so detached from the economic health of the average person. And this is not just in America. I'm personally Canadian, but the same trends hold true here, maybe to a different extent, but as a general trend, it's still ongoing. Same with Europe, same with plenty of places around the world. It's not just in the quote-unquote global north or the quote-unquote Western world. This is something we're seeing everywhere, but it's definitely heightened in these what you might call late stage capitalist economies, these democracies where we're supposed to have, one voice, one vote, kind of this notion of equality. But when you take into consideration the economic power that we each hold, it's truly not a democratic environment that we exist in. In short, we need more class consciousness. The word general strike needs to be put into the minds of every working class and middle class person. We need to stop apologizing for this elite billionaire class. We need to come together, overcome these mostly bullshit cultural divides. Even if they're real divides, let's put them to the side, because there's no point in fighting them if we're gonna drown in this class war.